everyone, this is People and Power, and I'm Summer El-Shahat. On today's program, On a Wing and a Prayer.
My greatest fear is that there will be crashes and that there will be hundreds of people that are killed.
Trust is an essential element of air travel. We trust that an airline knows what it's doing and will get us to our destination. And we trust that the aircraft we're flying is well designed, well built, and as safe as possible. Well, this edition of People and Power may shake that trust. For some months now, we've been investigating very serious allegations about the safety of one of the world's most commercially successful airliners. More than 1,500 of those planes are currently in service, carrying around 10 million people every year. The allegations refer to the way in which critically important parts of the aircraft were made and installed, and how deep anxieties about that process, brought to light by some of the plane manufacturer's own staff, were dealt with by the company's senior management, industry regulators and government. Tim Tate's film raises very disturbing questions about the legitimacy and integrity of aviation regulation.
Over the course of 3 years and in 3 different countries, there have been 3 almost identical aircraft crashes.
According to witnesses, the Boeing suddenly lost control before dropping from the sky. On impact, it broke into 3 pieces.
We just felt a big crash, all the lights went off and we felt the big impact and we realized that the plane had crashed.
We went inside the plane and took people out until the firemen told us we had to leave as the plane could explode.
Investigations into the causes of these accidents in Amsterdam, Jamaica and Colombia are ongoing, but crucial clues as to why each aircraft subsequently broke up on impact may lie in allegations about many of the most commonly used passenger planes in the world. If true, the entire international aviation safety system is threatened.
The design of these aircraft was not followed. They took shortcuts in the manufacture of these aircraft.
Nobody cared about the safety aspect. It was all about money. It was all about being lean and making parts as inexpensively as possible for Boeing.
We have an agency system, a civil aviation system in our industry that is unfortunately playing Russian roulette with our flying passengers.
Boeing has a proud history.
A preview of coast-to-coast commercial jet travel is staged by a Boeing 707 Stratoliner, forerunner of airliners scheduled for service in '58.
From the very beginning of commercial jet flight, it has set the industry's standards.
The sleek craft flies in from Seattle in 3 hours and 58 minutes, less than half the time it takes propeller-driven airliners.
And its aircraft have been the backbone of civil aviation across the world.
Clouds and rain fail to mar the maiden flight of America's newest Queen of the Airwaves.
For more than 40 years, freight trains have hauled aircraft bodies to Boeing's final assembly factories in Seattle from its construction plant 1,500 miles away in Wichita, Kansas. Gigi Pruitt's family worked for Boeing in Wichita for 3 generations.
Boeing's my heritage. My mother grew up in between the 2 plants during the 40s and 30s. This was my mother's backyard as a child. This is where she grew up.
Started working at Boeing in November 21st, 1996, and I was hired as a requirement support specialist for procurement. About 3 months later, I believe it is, I was promoted to a buyer.
Gigi Pruitt joined Boeing at a vital point in the company's history. For nearly 20 years, it had produced the world's most popular passenger plane, the 737 Classic series. On any given day, somewhere in the world, a 737 takes off or lands every 5 seconds. But by 1996, Boeing had lost market share to its European rival, Airbus. To restore its position, the company decided to introduce a new and technologically radical plane, to be called the 737 Next Generation, or NG. Previous models were built completely by hand. Parts for the 737 NG were to be designed, cut and shaped by hugely expensive computer-controlled machines. These would guarantee each piece was precise to within 0.003 of an inch, allowing the plane to fly higher and faster. Boeing also designed a new process for fitting these parts together. Advanced Technology Assembly, or ATA, would enable the airframe to slot together as quickly and as accurately as a piece of flat-pack furniture.
This ATA was designed so that the tolerances in putting the airplane together will be so tight that the aircraft will have higher strength and reliability. And in response to that, the FAA certified this airplane to have higher gross weight and to be able to operate at higher altitudes.
Every new aircraft design has to be approved by an official regulatory body. For American aircraft manufacturers like Boeing, the Federal Aviation Administration issues licenses called Type Design Certificates.
The type certificate is all of the engineering drawings and test data that you've put together that validate that it's an airplane that can be built and safely operated. Think about these giant airplanes. They're made of thousands of detailed parts, and you have to provide the FAA with all of the drawings for all of those detailed parts and processes that support the manufacture of those parts. Now that's your type design data that you are supposed to follow for every airplane, because the idea is that every airplane is just like that first one that was approved.
An aircraft fuselage is like a giant tube. That tube is made up of interlocking semicircular parts called chords. Put together, they form the frame around which every other part of the airframe is built and on which the external skin is assembled. Exit doorways and cargo hatches are weak points in this fuselage. To strengthen them, huge reinforcing sheets called bear straps are assembled round the holes. According to Boeing's own documentation for the 737NG, chords and bear straps are primary structural elements, parts which are critical to the plane's ability to fly safely.
The failure of PSEs could result in the catastrophic failure of the airplane.
These are the parts of airplanes that if they fail, we can have catastrophic events. We can have a decompression at altitude, or we can have a rupture in the vessel, in the fuselage vessel of the aircraft. As long as we can make that hold together, we can keep the passengers safe.
Boeing subcontracted the manufacture of these critical parts to a company called AHF Ducommun in Gardena, California. Each cord and bear strap for the 737NG was to be built here on giant computer-controlled tools, a process called CNC.
Hi there, I'm Captain Jim Thomas. I'm the 737 Fleet Training Manager for American Airlines, and I'd like to welcome you aboard our brand new 737 airplane.
And from the start of 1997, airlines across the world put the new plane into service.
It's going to be a great airplane to fly, and I look forward to flying with you on an American Airlines flight very soon.
These are Boeing's primary assembly factories in Wichita. It was here that Boeing assembled the parts from AHF Ducommun onto the 737NG airframes. And here, in 1998, that Gigi Pruitt first discovered problems with those parts.
The minute that I took the
desk of buying 737 next generation parts, I had shop personnel coming to me, talking to me about the problems and the issues that they were having with the parts not being manufactured accurately. Shy edge margin, out of contour, parts not fitting correctly, not understanding why we're having these issues with parts coming in when it's to be done by a CNC machine.
The affected parts were both bear straps and cords, critical primary structural elements of the 737NG fuselage.
One of the shop managers sent me email saying that they were having problems with the fail-safe cords, which are the long ribs that go all the way around the aircraft. Well, they go halfway around and then they join up to the ribs that come up from the bottom. And were telling me that from the beginning of the 1996 timeframe, when they started manufacturing these parts, that they were coming in with shy edge margins, they were out of contour.
Boeing's internal documents, which we have obtained, give a snapshot of the scale of the problem.
Part out of contour, quantity 1.
Part width, oversize, quantity 4.
Material thin, quantity 6.
Part undercut, quantity 26.
Hole mislocated, quantity 17.
They also show the source of the problem, AHF Ducommun. But according to Boeing staff, the company rejected only a handful of these defective parts. The rest were assembled onto the aircraft.
We were putting our foot down and not going to participate in allowing non-conforming parts to come in and be put on planes. But one of the managers wrote an email and said, "This is stupid. There's already 300 of these out there on planes. Why would we scrap them now?" So they used them. They put them on planes.
Under pressure from its own staff, in early 2000, Boeing agreed to send a multidisciplinary audit team to the Ducommun manufacturing plant. Its mission was to discover why Ducommun was delivering such bad parts. That journey was the start of an investigation which would change the lives of Gigi Pruitt and Taylor Smith forever.
We went out to the supplier to help them to make good parts. But they didn't want our help. In fact, their quality manager told us that they were going to stick 24 bear straps that we scrapped up a part of our body. It was very shocking that they would even talk to Boeing like that, because we were Boeing. I was the one buying the parts.
And what the investigators found inside the Ducommun plant shocked them profoundly, particularly the state of the critical computerized manufacturing tools.
It was atrocious what we found, really. The tools, a lot of them were just in piles here and there. They couldn't find a lot of them. They were treated horribly. And they're tools that are used to make these big parts that go on the airplane have to be designed, they have to be kept properly, they have to be maintained, they have to be calibrated, and Ducommun had no records to show any of that.
Instead of using the computerized manufacturing process set out in the 737NG's licensed design, the investigators discovered that Ducommun was cutting and building the parts by hand.
It was overwhelming what we saw. We took pictures because we knew no one would ever believe us. They literally took the template that they had and scribed with a magic marker on the material. Then took a hand cutter and cut where the magic marker was.
And they would take hand saws and saw the material off, and then the hand sander, and they would sand it down to as close as they could to this magic marker line. And then they would just come along and drill holes by hand. They were supposed to be the ATA holes, which were very closely toleranced. We're supposed to make this airplane fit together so easily. There is no way that they could have done it correctly.
People say, okay, so what? Well, the parts were bad. Now, these aircraft are flying at 35,000 feet. They're flying with 150 people on board. They're flying over long durations of water. It can't just pull over if there's a problem.
But there was worse to come. When the Boeing team asked to examine the documents, which were legally required to detail exactly how each part was made, they discovered that Ducommun appeared to have falsified these planning records.
Ducommun handed us planning when we first came in there to look at, so that we could look at what tools were listed and how the parts were manufactured. And that planning said that they did it on the NC machines. But when we went into the shop to look at how they were actually manufacturing parts, the shop trackers said that they were making them by hand.
So are you saying there were two sets of books?
Yes.
We have obtained sworn testimony by Ducommun's Director of Engineering. According to this, only a fraction of the parts it made for the 737NG were built by the approved computer-controlled processes.
I sat everybody around the table saying there's not enough NC machines in the world, nor are there enough CMMs to check these kinds of parts. 10% of them stayed on the machine. Maybe it was a little greater than that, but not much more.
The Boeing investigators believed that building these high-precision parts by hand completely violated the official type approval for the 737NG and made every aircraft using them potentially unsafe.
This is the entire skeleton of the 737NG. This is not just one thing that's holding another thing together. It's every fail-safe cord that goes from the beginning of the airplane to the end of the airplane. And when something happens, it's not only a failure of the one part, it cascades. So one part fails, it transmits stress to another part, and before you know it, the entire airplane fails.
But Ducommun seemed remarkably unworried.
They told us Boeing knew about it. And they also told one of our auditors to stay away from all of us because we were going to be shot. They had long arms that went deep into Boeing, and this would go nowhere.
What did you understand by them saying you were going to be shot?
I really didn't know what to understand. I mean, at that point, it was like, are you serious? Are you talking a physical threat? Are you talking, you know, we're going to lose our jobs? Or what are they actually referring to? So we reported it to corporate internal audit. I felt it was a huge red flag that a supplier felt so confident to tell a team of 14 people from Boeing that they were going to be shot. Makes you wonder.
The investigation team returned to Wichita in the summer of 2000. They reported what they'd found at Ducommun to Boeing's management.
I expected my management to be as shocked and appalled as I was, because the technical issues that were, and the quality issues that we found on those particular parts that Ducommun was manufacturing could very well have caused catastrophic failure in an aircraft.
We have obtained a draft of an internal Boeing memorandum written by its internal affairs managers after the investigation team had completed the audit at Ducommun. Its warnings about the problems there, to be sent to the company's most senior executives, were stark.
The severity of these conditions is documented via photographs and poses a quality risk to the production of quality airplane parts. 2 sets of planning documents were found to exist. Misrepresentation of the manufacturing process jeopardizes the integrity of airplane parts. This situation cannot be ignored. The integrity of AHF Ducommun as a partnered supplier places the Boeing company at risk. Immediately cease all new business activity with AHF Ducommun and consider disengagement.
Boeing refuses to discuss this memorandum or what action it took on its warnings. But on the shop floor, the problems continued, and Gigi Pruitt witnessed Boeing workers taking dangerous shortcuts to make the faulty parts fit.
The woman who was doing the assembly that I was following put the next part on it. The holes didn't meet up, so she re-drilled holes to attach where it needed to be. And we asked her, why are you not writing a non-conformance record and making the supplier accountable? She said, my manager won't let me. If I reject all the parts that come in that aren't lining up with the ATA, then we're going to shut down the line, and I've got to make rate.
She also watched other Boeing assembly workers taking it on themselves to disguise the problems with the ill-fitting parts.
They shimmed and filled at the top and sprayed it green. And the guy that we were talking to in the shop said, "They'll never know. Looks like the same part. It looks great."
And when that didn't work, the assembly line staff forced the parts together, even beating them with steel hammers.
There are records that show that the parts were hammered into position in some cases. You bend a part enough, you beat it enough, it's going to put stresses in it. It's more likely to crack, and it's more likely to corrode.
The Federal Aviation Administration has given Boeing delegated authority, essentially trusting it to police its own processes in return for an undertaking that it will voluntarily report any problem to the regulator. But Boeing's investigators say that the company refused to do so.
So we went to Security Investigations Director and we said, in the agreement you have with the FAA, you're to self-disclose any nonconformance issues. And they're going to give you grace, and they're going to work with you, and they're not going to beat you up, and it's going to be out on the table, and we're going to make sure that planes are safe that are already flying. And we were told, if you go and tell anyone, Boeing could sue you.
Who told you that?
The Director of Security told Taylor Smith and I that.
How did that make you feel?
Very scared. It was like a threat. And I really took offense to being threatened by my own company for trying to be ethical and for trying to protect the American public, basically.
The Boeing investigators now faced an agonizing choice: protecting themselves or turning whistleblower to protect the flying public.
I couldn't understand how come our management really didn't want to know these things. Boeing makes a lot of money, and they're supposedly the premier aircraft of the world. You know, that's what we lived by. We're Boeing. We make great aircraft. And so you would expect that safety would be one of the #1 things that they would look at.
We have hundreds of planes flying out there. So where do we stand? What do we do? What's our responsibility to society? No longer our responsibility to this company. What's our responsibility to society? And at that point, there was a core group of us who said, what direction do we go?
The US Department of Justice is responsible for protecting whistleblowers. In the spring of 2002, Gigi Pruitt and Taylor Smith took their concerns to Washington.
We actually met with the government and told them our story, and they had the same reaction as most people do when they hear our story to begin with, and they're shocked and appalled. We will protect you. The Department of Justice told us, we'll protect you. We will not let you be retaliated against. We will keep you safe.
We were assured that our identity would be kept protected. It was under seal, and that no one would tell Boeing who we were. The FAA would do an investigation to find out what could be done to secure the safety. We had great hope that would be done.
But what happened next would shake their faith, not just in the safety of the 737NG, but in the whole system of aircraft regulation and in the US government itself.
As you'd expect, we asked AHF Ducommun and Boeing to respond to the allegations in this part of our film, specifically about the parts fitted on 737NG aircraft. Boeing's response came in an email. It said the whistleblowers' claims were without merit and added,
Boeing's quality control process has been demonstrated through decades of use to be an effective method to maintain quality and safety.
We asked AHF Ducommun about the allegation that the company had made non-conforming parts for the 737NG. We also asked it to explain why it had kept 2 contradictory sets of production records for these parts. The company did not reply to our correspondence. So, when the whistleblowers took their concerns to safety regulators and the US government, what response did they get?
Were they trying to find something? Were they looking to see if there really was a safety problem? Or did they want to just take some type of action to say, we looked, we didn't find anything, it's okay, fly them like they are?
That's coming up in part 2. Welcome back. Part 1 of this extended People and Power detailed very serious allegations about the safety of critical parts installed between 1996 and 2004 on the Boeing 737NG, one of the world's most commercially successful passenger jets. The claims were made by Boeing whistleblowers Gigi Pruitt and Taylor Smith, who also alleged that the company's management ordered them to conceal the problem. They decided to take their concerns to regulators in Washington. But as the second part of our investigation reveals, what happened next shook their faith in the whole system of aircraft safety regulation and in the US government itself.
Washington National Airport, one of the busiest airports in America. Less than 3 miles from the White House and Capitol Hill, it's also one of the most securely guarded against terrorists. But every day more than 700 planes land here, many of them Boeing 737NGs. And many of those are alleged to have been built with illegal and dangerous parts, which could cause a disaster as bad as any terrorist attack.
It's getting to the point where there's going to be a catastrophic failure of a 737. We don't know when that hour is going to hit, but we know it's going to happen.
Investigators from within Boeing discovered the problem with the 737NG in early 2000. But they say Boeing ordered them to conceal it. In 2002, they took their fears to the US Department of Justice. Its senior lawyers promised to order an official inquiry by the Federal Aviation Administration. Parts of the FAA investigation, carried out in 2002, have been released under the Freedom of Information Act. The documents have been partly redacted by the FAA, but the only investigative actions recorded in these publicly viewable documents are that the FAA looked up the address of the company which made the faulty parts, AHF Ducommun, and visited Ducommun's website.
The investigation by the FAA was laughable. It was really laughable. And they concluded at the end of it, without really any apparent consideration of the engineering requirements, the manufacturing requirements, the manufacturing data, the tag or nonconformity history of the aircraft, they concluded that there was not a problem, closed the investigation.
But because Boeing sold some 737NGs to the US military, the Federal Defense Criminal Investigative Service was carrying out a simultaneous inquiry into the whistleblowers' evidence. We have obtained a copy of its investigative files. These appear to confirm some of the allegations concerning faulty parts installed on Boeing 737NGs.
July 2nd, 2002, I visited the Boeing Company, Seattle. Looked at installed bear straps and fail-safe cords. Gap conditions, short edge distance on fasteners.
The DCIS dossier also shows it knew that Boeing's practice of hammering ill-fitting parts onto airframes could be problematic.
The preload, internal stress on parts to get them to fit, on some of these components could be problematic.
And Ducommun officials apparently admitted to the DCIS that many of these parts were non-conforming and therefore not legally approved.
It was very common not to follow the proper processes or procedures when making the parts. These non-conforming parts were submitted to Boeing for disposition.
An approved part is a safe part. An approved part is an airworthy part. An airworthy part can fly on an airplane. An airworthy airplane is safe to fly. An unapproved part is not airworthy. An unairworthy airplane can't fly. I mean, it may actually technically be able to take off and land, but it shouldn't. It's not safe.
Yet despite this evidence, the Department of Justice ordered an end to any official investigation of the 737NG. With nowhere left to turn, in 2005 the whistleblowers went to court, filing suit against Boeing and Ducomen. By then, their identities had been leaked to Boeing. Both of them lost their jobs.
I felt very betrayed. You know, you expect the government to be for the citizens and for the safety of the people, but apparently they're more concerned about the big business than they are about us.
For the last 6 years, the whistleblowers and their legal team have spent their own money trying to bring the case to court. But almost all the evidence they have uncovered in Boeing's files has been sealed under a protective order. How many documents have you had disclosed in this case?
From Boeing, near 300,000. From Ducomen, well in excess of 100,000. In addition to that, we've obtained documents from the Boeing Technical Library, 10 to 20,000, somewhere in that range.
How many of those documents are in the public domain?
Few. Most, a few hundred at the most.
Is there anything which contradicts what the whistleblowers have said?
Nothing.
Armed with this new documentary evidence, earlier this year the whistleblowers once again approached the FAA. A conference was set up, but once again the FAA seemed completely uninterested.
If there was a single question asked by any of the FAA people, I don't remember it. In that short conversation, one of our technical experts put on, gave a little presentation to them, and silence on the other end.
Dr. Michael Dry Cohen was one of the whistleblowers' experts. A former FAA official and a highly respected aircraft safety engineer, he is shocked by the FAA's reluctance to investigate the problem thoroughly.
My perception of what I used to consider my friends in the FAA is that they are ignoring this problem because it's too big to be true. These non-conforming parts are like a virus in our body. If we allow the virus to go unchecked, it's going to manifest itself in a catastrophic failure and it's going to kill a lot of people.
To your knowledge, has the FAA itself examined any of these parts?
No.
Has it asked anyone else to examine these parts?
No.
Examining structural parts like cords and bear straps, once they have been assembled onto an aircraft, is a difficult and expensive process. We took Pat Duggins, one of America's most respected aircraft manufacturing experts and a witness for the whistleblowers, to an aircraft boneyard in California's Mojave Desert. On an old and decommissioned 737 Classic, he will demonstrate the scale of the task.
Mike, what I'd like for you to do is in the forward cargo compartment, remove some fiberglass panels. To inspect the primary structural elements of an airplane, you must first expose them from the inside. You can't see through the outside of the skin to see if it's corroding or cracking. It's a complex, time-consuming process. We're in the forward cargo area of the 737.
Once these structural parts are exposed, evidence of potentially dangerous stress becomes clear.
This repair to this fail-safe core tells us that at some point in the operational life of this airplane, there was a crack, corrosion.
It is exactly this sort of invasive examination that the whistleblowers say the FAA should have demanded on the 737NG. Has the FAA ordered this type of inspection of any of those aircraft?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, they're the oversight and regulatory agency over the airplane business, and they don't seem to want to do that for some reason. And if we look at the investigation that they did in the beginning, it was absolutely a sham. And so it makes you wonder what they were looking for. Were they trying to find something? Were they looking to see if there really was a safety problem? Or did they want to just take some type of action to say, we looked, we didn't find anything, it's okay, fly them like they are?
But the Whistleblowers experts found evidence of serious stress problems in the 737NG parts. And they found it in the FAA's own files. The FAA maintains a database of service difficulty reports, warnings from airlines about problems they have discovered during routine maintenance. A snapshot sample of these SDRs from a handful of airlines revealed highly advanced Level 2 corrosion occurring in the key 737NG structural parts, cords and bear straps, and in aircraft less than 8 years old.
Now, I personally performed an analysis of the FAA's service difficulty reporting database. And what I was expecting to see is a couple of cracks, a couple of corrosion issues, but no, I'm finding significant volumes of cracking and corrosion on these parts, which are primary structural elements.
We shouldn't see level 2 corrosion. It's too early in the life of the airplane. The design operational life is 30 years. And at 8 years, we're having to replace primary structural elements? That's wrong.
What happens to level 2 corrosion if it's not dealt with?
It just keeps progressing. It's like cancer, and it just keeps getting worse and worse until you find it.
And if you don't find it?
It fails. You have a catastrophic failure.
In the past 3 years, there has been a series of accidents involving 737NGs. 3 of them seem to indicate problems with the key structural parts of the aircraft. On February the 25th, 2009, 9 people died when a Turkish Airlines 737NG overshot the runway at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. On December the 23rd, 2009, 40 passengers were injured when an American Airlines 737NG overshot the runway at Kingston Airport, Jamaica. And on August the 17th, 2010, when a 737NG operated by the Colombian airline Airlines also overshot the runway at the holiday island of San Andres, 1 passenger died and dozens were injured. In all 3 accidents, the aircraft were 8 years old, the age at which serious problems of corrosion and cracking have been recorded. Each aircraft broke into 3 pieces. According to the Whistleblowers experts, each broke at exactly the same points on their fuselage. And, they say, at each of these points, the faulty Ducommun parts had been installed.
The airplane's not designed to fall apart like that. It should have absorbed that stress, and the people that were slightly injured wouldn't have been injured.
The aircraft should not have broken up, in your view?
Absolutely should not.
We have obtained footage of a test crash conducted by the FAA in 1984. It shows the extraordinary strength of an aircraft whose parts hadn't been ill-formed, pre-stressed, or badly fitted. The FAA flew a remotely controlled Boeing 707 into the floor of the Mojave Desert to see what happens to a fuselage on impact. Although it hit the ground at much higher speeds than the 737NGs in Amsterdam, Jamaica and Colombia, its fuselage remained intact. We asked the FAA a series of specific questions about its investigations into the problems with 737NGs. It refused to answer them, but it issued a statement saying that it had no reason to believe there is a safety problem with the 737NG parts, and that even if they failed, the failure would not affect the continued safe flight and landing of the aircraft.
I think you can say anything you want, but the facts say they're not safe.
But our inquiries in Jamaica suggest that the American authorities have failed to disclose potentially crucial information. At Kingston Airport, an international investigation into the 737NG accident began on Christmas Eve 2009. The Jamaican authorities were joined by experts from the FAA and the US National Transportation Safety Board.
We requested assistance from the state of manufacturer, so the FAA and the NTSB joined for the accident team, and Boeing as well. And I must say the cooperation at an international level between Jamaica and the United States was excellent.
But despite this cooperation, crucial information that could explain why the plane broke up has not been shared with the Jamaican Civil Aviation Authority.
There have been allegations concerning some of the major structural parts on that aircraft. Have you seen those allegations?
No, I have not. What would these allegations be?
There are allegations from people who used to work at Boeing that the parts, or some of the parts, put on the planes were non-conforming and may not have been up to standard. But you've not been made aware of that?
No, I find that somewhat surprising.
Why would the Federal Aviation Administration not pass on such apparently clear evidence of a life-threatening problem? An insider's detailed knowledge of the FAA's workings may provide an answer. She says the FAA has long since ceased to regulate the industry effectively.
Now, I've been with the FAA for 26 years, and we've kind of evolved over the years from a pretty hardcore, we're regulators, to a kinder, gentler season, so to speak.
Linda Goodrich is a full-time FAA safety inspector and vice president of PASS, the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists Union. She has watched with alarm as the FAA's relationship with the aircraft industry has changed for the worse.
A cozy relationship has developed, kind of recognizing that the customer was the industry, not the flying public and the taxpayer. Safety is second to making sure that we get pushback, making sure that that airplane goes out the building somehow. I think they push the envelope until the level of safety is so thin, and then just hope to God that something doesn't happen on their watch.
Over the past 15 years, the FAA has been criticised in a series of cases for failing to enforce its own regulations and protect aviation safety. But the whistleblowers now believe they are fighting not just the FAA, but the US government itself. In March this year, unprompted, the US Department of Justice issued a formal announcement stating that the NTSB had cleared the faulty Ducommun parts of any involvement in the Jamaican accident.
The NTSB determined that there was no connection between the allegedly non-conforming fail-safe cords and the damage to American Airlines 331 Jamaica.
But the NTSB, the US Accident Investigation Department, categorically denies ever having said this.
We have not reached any conclusions, nor have we stated as such on the accident involving the AA737 in Jamaica.
Why would the Justice Department issue that statement?
Tim, I have no idea. It's a mystery to me. That was, while we had been largely ignored by the federal government, by the Justice Department, that was the first indication to me that the federal government was trying to help Boeing.
We asked the Department of Justice to explain its actions. It refused. But this summer, as the whistleblowers' attempts to get the matter to court reached a crucial stage, Bill Skepnek became convinced that the Department of Justice was working to help Boeing's case.
On the record, this is the videotaped deposition.
This man is Robert Easton, the FAA's chief scientific and technical advisor. At the suggestion of the Department of Justice, he has just filed a sworn declaration, giving the Boeing 737NG a clean bill of health.
He gave us an affidavit saying that he had reviewed some materials, and that based upon his review of those materials, there were no unsafe conditions created by what Boeing had done.
In a videotaped pre-trial hearing, Bill Skepnek cross-examines Mr. Easton about his statement.
paragraph 14 of your declaration, you stated, based on my review, there is an absence of evidence that would support the plaintiff's fundamental allegation that affected aircraft are not safe and should be grounded.
Based on the evidence I reviewed, there was not enough information, well, there's not any data to make a determination that there was an unsafe condition.
But under cross-examination, Mr. Easton, the FAA's chief safety expert, admits he hasn't even looked at the administration's own database of reports which clearly reveal problems with the 737NG parts.
For instance, the SDR
service difficulty reports.
Okay, that's an FAA system, correct?
Yes.
And so do you have access to the information in the SDR system?
I believe I could gain access. I have never accessed it.
Okay. Have you ever asked others to do searches in the SDR system for you?
No.
And most surprising of all, the video of this hearing captures Mr. Easton admitting that he hadn't written his sworn statement exonerating Boeing. Instead, it was largely written by Boeing's lawyer, Steve Coe.
Did you draft that language?
As I recall, the first draft came from Mr. Cole, and when I reviewed it, I believe I did not change that.
Boeing's lawyers met with him, drafted his statement that he then signed. He made a couple of little changes to it. The Boeing lawyers drafted his statement.
How can a company which is being investigated by the FAA draft a clean bill of health from the FAA for that company?
Well, when I was pulled over for a ticket a little bit ago for going 10 miles over the speed limit, I kind of wanted to draft my own ticket too. The cop didn't let me do that. Unfortunately, it goes worse than that. What's at stake here is the safety of these aircraft, is the safety of the whole aviation system.
I am very seriously concerned about a catastrophic cabin failure, structural failure at altitude. And I think it would be a 737NG, and it will lose its ability to stay together, and unfortunately will be a smoking hole in the ground.
For 10 years, the Boeing whistleblowers have fought to prevent that smoking hole from happening, whatever the personal cost.
So do you draw a line in the sand and say, I'm going to die being a Boeing employee, loyal to them, covering up, and who knows how many people put their lives at risk flying on planes? Or do I draw the line in the sand and say, you know what? I have to be able to live with myself and know that I did the right thing, no matter what it costs.
You know, it's a tough road if you take a stand against large companies and the government. And it's had a personal effect on me. You know, just the stress itself has had an effect on my health. It's had an effect on my family and my friends. I mean, it's a heavy burden to bear. But my greatest fear is that the aircraft will start having big issues. There will be crashes and that there will be hundreds of people that are killed. And I'll wonder whether I did enough.
In August this year, we began asking Boeing, AHF Common, the Federal Aviation Administration and the US Department of Justice to be interviewed in connection with this film. Boeing, the FAA and the Department of Justice all declined, citing ongoing litigation as the reason. AHF Common didn't respond. We also sent each of them a series of specific questions concerning the allegations made in this program. As we told you in part 1, Boeing replied saying that the whistleblowers' case was without merit. It also said the whistleblower's charge of retaliation by the company and or its director of security was false.
Plaintiffs have never produced any evidence to support their assertion other than their own claim. Boeing has a strong policy against retaliation in any situation.
Boeing added that the Department of Defense and the FAA had concluded that there was no wrongdoing on the part of Ducommun or Boeing, and that the Department of Justice had twice declined to participate in the lawsuit. HF Ducommun failed to reply to any of our correspondence, but the company has filed a court response to the Whistleblowers legal case, asking that it be dismissed on the grounds that the company didn't deceive Boeing, that it had no knowledge that the planes would be sold to the government, and that the whistleblowers' arguments were merely an internal employment dispute with Boeing. The Federal Aviation Administration declined to comment on the ongoing litigation. However, it did give us the statement.
In 2002, the FAA received an allegation of non-conforming parts manufactured by Ducommun. We inspected parts at Ducommun and their installation on airplanes at Boeing. We found the parts and installations conformed to design or were accepted through the FAA-approved Boeing quality system. Since the parts were conforming, we could not justify inspecting parts that were installed from 1994 to 2002. We did, however, continue 2 audits that identified areas of non-compliance with processes, and these were corrected by Ducommun and Boeing.
The FAA added that it had performed an engineering review of the alleged suspect parts. It said this had determined that if the parts failed, it would not affect the safe flight and landing of the aircraft. When we asked the FAA to see a copy of that review, it told us that the Department of Justice had identified the document as privileged and not subject to release. We also asked the FAA about the deposition given by its chief scientific officer, Bob Easton, to the Whistleblowers legal team, which Mr. Easton agreed had been drafted by Boeing. The FAA confirmed that at Boeing's request, the company's lawyers had met Mr. Easton and another FAA official twice before the deposition.
Based on the information from these sessions, Boeing's counsel prepared a draft declaration for Bob's review. Bob made substantial revisions to the draft and signed the revised declaration. Bob's testimony only addressed the safety issue. He did not exonerate the parts.
Finally, we asked the Department of Justice why it had falsely announced that the National Transportation Safety Board had cleared the Ducommun parts of any involvement in the American Airlines accident in Jamaica earlier this year. The Department of Justice declined to comment. That's it for this edition of People and Power. If you want to review some of the documents we've referred to in this programme, you can find them on our website at aljazeera.net/English. Until next time, bye-bye.